All right, good morning. It looks like most of us are logged in here. I want to just start by thanking everyone for being flexible and meeting again online today. Again, I know it's not optimal, like being in the classroom as much as you do, but unfortunately, my daughter's been sick for almost 10 days now, and she is still here at home, so I'm here with her. Having said that, we are moving ahead today, and today is actually going to be a little bit of an aside from our normal curriculum, and we have our last unit, the last of the ideological awareness units for this semester. We're going to dedicate today's class to this, and that's it. We're going to continue back in with our regularly scheduled anatomy program on Wednesday. But today, as the world-renowned hip-hop group Salt and Pepper once said, let's talk about sex. So today's topic is sexual diversity in nature. So what is this going to look like? For today's class, basically, we're going to do a little bit of writing and reflecting about what you already know about sex and sex determination. We're going to watch a short video about those topics, which I will post. Well, I'll explain that in a moment. And then I'm going to just give a kind of general overview lecture, very short, and you'll have a chance to write another reflection. And as I said, my goal is to keep this entire unit on sex kind of contained to the next 50 minutes. Having said that, in advance of class today, you had some reading as well as some videos related to the brain, wrapping up our unit on the brain. So before I get into this, let me just pause and see what questions you have. And the best way, if you do have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or just unmute yourself and you can talk, speak up at any time. Any questions?
This isn't really about like the brain I guess, kind of, but for the class program today, it says the quiz is on Wednesday. I thought it was Friday.
The quiz is on Wednesday this week. That's correct.
Okay. Okay,
yep.
Thank you.
Yep, and I have a little bit more information about that at the end of the lecture today, but it will be on our next class on Wednesday. Yeah, thanks for asking that, Hannah. Any other questions? All right, let's do it then. Oh, actually, before we do it, I have one slide. This is kind of random and a personal thing, but I'm looking for a house setter this summer here in Delaware for about 2 months in June and July. We're basically looking to have someone take care of our kitties and our turtles and look after the house while we're in Europe for 2 months. And so it'd be rent-free, just taking care of some animals. If you or anyone you know is looking for housing this summer here in Delaware, please contact me and let me know. Okay, and yeah, I had to include some pictures of the cats because Potato is adorable. All right, so we're going to start off today with a KWLQ chart, which is a little weird, but it stands for know, want or wonder, learn, and questions. And the idea here is a chance for you to kind of reflect on what you already know about how sex is determined in organisms. So we can think about humans, but also across the diversity of the living world, right? And so the idea here is you're going to get a piece of paper, and I recommend we're going to put a lot on this piece of paper. So get like a full sheet of paper and divide it into 4 quadrants. The upper left is going to be your K block, the upper right, your W block. And the K block is ask the question, what do you already know about how sex is determined in animals? And I should have actually written here in organisms generally, because plants have sexes as well. Under W, you can write about what do you want to know about sex determination? What do you wonder? Under L, what have you learned about sex determination? And under Q, what questions do you still have about sex determination? So what I'd like to do right now is to take 5 minutes, get a big piece of paper and set up this chart. At the end of class today, you'll have a link and you'll upload an image of this chart. And so set up this 4-quarter chart on your paper and take some time and answer or fill in, I shouldn't say answer, but fill in the first 2 blocks, what you already know about sex determination, and then what you want to know or what you're interested in or what you wonder about. So go ahead and I'm going to set a timer here. We'll take 5 minutes to set up this chart. Please fill in. You don't have to write in complete sentences here, but I will ask you to upload this document at the end of the lecture. And so I'm actually genuinely curious about what knowledge you're bringing into this class and what aspects of this you would like to know. So go ahead and start with that. I'm going to just mute myself here and we'll give this 5 minutes, but then If you have any questions at any time, of course, just let me know. Okay, go for it. All right, you've got about 30 seconds left here, so let's go ahead and kind of wrap that up. And let's move in now. And now you've kind of reflected a little bit about what you're bringing to class, both in terms of knowledge and curiosity. I want to go ahead and just start things off with a short video. So this video is it's a little short of 6 minutes long. Now, I recognize that it doesn't really work to show this over Zoom. So what I'm going to do instead is post the link to the video in the chat here. There it is. So go ahead and take 6 minutes and watch the video. We'll do the same, and then we can bring it back and discuss the video. So go ahead. I will pause the recording here as well. All right, I'm going to bring us back here. There should have been enough time for everyone to watch that short video. So as you probably have surmised at this point, the overall takeaway message of today's unit is that sex determination and sex itself is pretty complicated. And by that, I mean is that there's lots of different dimensions to how sex is defined and how it is determined. And we're going to unpack a little bit of those today. As with some of these lessons, this provides a kind of general, gross overview of the topic without getting too in-depth, but I hope provides some information that's important and relevant to the class and stuff for you to think about moving forward. So let's talk about sex determination in nature. As you saw in the video, there are a slew of different ways that sex can be determined in nature. Now, we tend to generally, because we're humans and because our sex determining mechanism is genetic, based on X and Y chromosomes, as you saw in the video, we kind of tend to extrapolate that to other organisms, but that is absolutely not the case. Sex can be determined by genetics in other systems, and as you saw in the video, by factors in the environment, even such as temperature. So that's an aspect that I'm most familiar with is temperature dependent, what's called temperature dependent sex determination in reptiles. So for example, alligators and most turtles, the temperature at which an egg incubates will determine if that individual develops into a male or a female. So the point here is that the system is complicated, right? Now, furthermore, what's even more fascinating in my mind is that the system is not static either. They can actually change over time. So I've got kind of a complicated figure here. Don't worry about the details of it. The point is that over time, and by time, I mean over kind of evolutionary time, generations of time, millions of years, is that the chromosome, the part of your genetic code that determines your sex, can change. And in fact, new sex determining genes can arise and can cause a transition in sex. So the mechanism, even when sex determination is genetic, that system is not necessarily the same over the long term for an organism. It can evolve and change, and there can be many ways that can transition in the future. So who knows, maybe our descendants someday will have a different mechanism determining sex. So because of all of these kind of complications and different ways that this can happen, we have some really cool examples in the natural world. So here's an example of these little Iberian moles, Talpa occidentalis. And in these guys, I shouldn't say guys, in this organism, all the females have something called ovotestes, which are gonads. So for us humans, gonads would include testes and ovaries. So these guys have a kind of gonad called an ovoteste that contains both ovarian and testicular tissue. And if they receive both two X chromosomes from their parents, they have ovotestes, and they make eggs and produce the hormone testosterone, which is generally associated with more male characteristics. But if they're XY, they have testes and they only make sperm. So here we have kind of this intersection of the kind of gamete that the cells are producing, as well as the hormone that they're producing. And so again, it's not, a point here is that they have kind of a more complicated system than we do as humans. This is actually one of my favorites, hyenas. So all female hyenas have functional penises that they use to mount each other, and they actually give birth through their penises. Yes, you heard me right there. It's pretty wild. These guys are a great example, again, of they're an example in the animal kingdom of a matriarchal social system. And interestingly, the having an erect penis is a sign of submission in this matriarchal society. And if you're the female and you don't have an erect penis, well, then you get to be the dominant leader of the entire pack. Actually, I think it's not necessarily one leads to the other, but if you are the dominant female, then you don't have an erect penis in these social exchanges. Cool stuff, right? Another good example is some species of gobies. This was mentioned in the video in the context of clownfish, where the sex of the reproducing adult organisms can actually switch even as they're an adult. So generally in the animal kingdom, we think of sex as being something that's determined early in life. So for example, in the embryo stage, and then carries forth and is stable throughout the rest of the rest of the organism's life. That is certainly not always the case. And we see examples of this with the Australian goby, where the sex can change depending, interestingly, on how many males and females are in the population. And so you can imagine that if you're in a population, let's say, that was overwhelmingly female and not a lot of males, if you wanted to reproduce, well, then it would be advantageous for you to switch and become a male, because then there's fewer males to compete with and more females that could be potential mates. Or vice versa. If you're in a group of fish that's predominantly male with fewer females, predominantly females with fewer males, then I got that backwards again. Let me slow down. If you're in a group of fish that is predominantly males with fewer females, then it behooves you to become a female, because then again, you have greater choice of mates and less of the same sex with which you would compete for reproduction. So those are just some general examples. Of course, there's many, many more. I'm going to pause here and see if you have any questions or any other examples that you know of that maybe you'd like to share. And I know that doing this online isn't necessarily the most conducive, but we'll go ahead and give it a shot. I'll just pause for a second. Okay, well, I will continue a little more. And what I want to do now is transition. We've given these examples of how these sex determining mechanisms in animals is complicated. Let's bring that back to humans. So this is a human anatomy class. And the important takeaway here is that there are lots of factors that can influence both the sex determining mechanisms as well as your gender identity. And so you'll notice here that I'm using both the terms sex and gender. And I want to just emphasize, this is very important to the fundamental concept here, that those are two different things. So sex is generally referred to as biological sex. And so this is the product of your anatomy and your physiology. Well, they both are, but it's more related to your anatomy and physiology, whereas gender is your gender identity. And so humans are the only animals that really have a gender, that we have these mental and social constructs that allow us to identify more or less with different biological sexes. And so it's really important to note when we talk about those two terms that gender and sex are different and that only humans have gender. And so just to show you an example here, you've probably all seen the gender unicorn. I happen to love the gender unicorn. This is a cool way to explain this. And the takeaway message here is that there's multiple dimensions along which people can vary. So you can vary in your gender identity, your gender expression, the sex with which you were assigned at birth, and then also in terms of who you're attracted to as a potential mate, both physically or emotionally. There's two important concepts that I want to emphasize here. One is that there's all of these different dimensions of gender and sex that are overlapping and complementary. And two, that these dimensions are continuum. So they're not necessarily, you don't see necessarily, for example, if we take the top one under gender identity, it's not a matter of you're either on this side and you're a boy, or on this side and you identify as a girl. It's a continuum, and people identify all along that continuum, and also those things can change. They can change as you grow, as you develop. All of these factors can influence that. And so what's the other important takeaway message here is that generally when we do dichotomize the sexes or dichotomize the genders, this is generally referred to as cis normativity, where you kind of wash away or forget all of these different complex dimensions and consider just having males and females as quote unquote normal. And when you make this construct, when you move forward, especially in our context here, when we think about biology, think about human biology, think about the health fields, is if that is considered normal and everything else is maybe considered quote unquote unnormal, well, that eliminates a lot of people and excludes people from medical care, from being represented in everything from anatomy textbooks to represented in legislation and things like that. And we saw some examples of this earlier in the semester. A few weeks ago, some of you read the article about factors that were limiting access to medical care for gay, lesbian, queer, and transgender communities. And that ties in exactly to that. And this we refer to, this idea is referred to as biological binary essentialism. So this is the really, what's the word I want to use? Strict belief that sex is determined and you're either a male or a female and boom, that's it. And once that's determined, that can't change. And there's no other kind of other dimensions to sex and gender. I also see some other ways to represent this. This is a nice one too, the genderbread person. So this is the idea, again, a little redundant to the gender unicorn, but again, the idea that there's these multiple dimensions of identity that intersect to create someone's sex and someone's gender. And again, I want to just bring this back. What is most relevant for us in this course, especially those of you looking to get into the health fields, is to recognize this multidimensionality and not base decisions or base research or things like that on this kind of binary sexual essentialism. Now, one thing that there's lots more we could talk about this. And in fact, you could take entire courses on this. Maybe some of you have taken a course with Dr. Reichard, covers some of this in many of his classes. But one aspect that I want to just focus in on in a tiny bit more detail is this relationship between sex and gender. Now, what's interesting is that developmentally in our embryo stage, that our gonadal sex, so this refers specifically to what kind of gonadal tissues we develop, which is generally either testes or ovaries, that develops before parts of the brain that are responsible for complex recognition develop. And that's due to kind of complex interplay of hormones and other factors, right? And so when you have these two important developmental stages happen at different times, what that can do is that can set up for the potential for either someone to be cisgender, where that gonadal sex matches the perceived gender that develops later as complex cognition develops, or you can develop as transgender, where this gonadal anatomy is different from the perceived gender that develops when this complex cognition arises. And so we just had Transgender Awareness Week here and else everywhere 2 weeks ago, I believe that was. And so this is relevant to that, thinking about that. And what can happen then, because we know that biological sex and gender are these multi-dimensional aspects of someone's identity, is that things like hormone therapy or gender affirming surgeries can help align this perceived gender with biological sex. And that can actually be really important if you're in a state where how you perceive yourself doesn't match certain aspects of your biology. Again, there's lots more we can talk about there, but I just want to get us kind of thinking about these things more generally, and especially for those of you looking to go into the health, well, for all of us, regardless of your field, but maybe a focus on those of you looking to go into the health field to kind of think about these things and be aware of these things. I'm going to pause here and just walk us through a few more slides. I've got a little short exercise here. And I'm just going to pause here and see if anyone has questions or anything else they'd like to add before we move on. It's quiet today. All right, like I said, I'm just going to talk a little more here. Where we see this kind of cis normativity or this binary biological essentialism is very often in literature, like scientific literature, or even reporting on science stories in journalism in a way that sometimes intentionally, but often very much unintentionally or subconsciously normalizes cisgender, let's say, and makes other ways of gender identity seem abnormal. And so you see some examples of this here. You can look at some examples here about how we can change our language to make it more inclusive and to not make one kind of set of identities be the normal against which everything else is judged. And so let's just look at one example here. So let's say here, let's look at the bottom example here on the top row here about using men, male, women, and female. So an example that's given here is that the mother parent carries a fetus for 9 months. So that 9 months obviously is the average gestational period for a human, but this is just general for any organism. And what we can say here is that the gestation, we can change mother out for gestational parent if we want to make a generalized statement referring to the fact that in many organisms, the male actually carries the offspring. So a famous example of that is seahorses, right? And pipefish and that group of fish, the male actually carries the offspring. So the idea here, again, is to recognize this diversity without favoring kind of one way of doing things over another. And you can see some other examples there. And so I have some discussion questions here, and I might just leave these open. We'll open the floor again, but again, I know that talking over Zoom isn't always the best way to make this work, but at least take a moment and reflect on these two questions. The first is, how do societal norms of cis-normativity and biological binary essentialism impact science? So what influence do they have on what research is conducted, how results are interpreted, and how policies are put in place based on that research? And then the second part is, how does science impact these societal norms? So how can our continuing learning and understanding about the natural world come back and influence the way people generally think about these topics? So I'm going to give you a few seconds to just think about that and see if anyone would like to jump in with any additional thoughts on that. That's okay if not, I get it. Okay. With that in mind, just to conclude, the takeaway message here is that in the natural world, sex isn't binary and is determined by a variety of different mechanisms, including both genetics, chromosomes, as well as temperature, environment, hormones, et cetera, et cetera. Also, it's fluid. It can change within an individual's lifetime. And then humans, that our tendency to categorize and assign sex in nature is informed by our societal values. And so the way that our society, our societal structures and the way that we interact with the world as a society impacts the way that we see other organisms in the natural world. And that this is kind of a cycle that feeds on itself. So having said that, giving you the whirlwind tour, the very whirlwind tour, let's go back to your KWLQ chart. And I'd like you to take 5 minutes. Again, I'll set my timer here. And now please fill in the L and the Q boxes in your chart. I'll mute myself here, but I'll stay attentive if you have any questions. Okay, we've got about 30 seconds left. We'll bring it back and wrap a few things up here. All right, let's go ahead and wrap that up. Of course, you can add to it later. I just have a little bit of information here for you and your ticket out, which I guess is more of a longer reflection from today's class. So just some reminders. First of all, I'd like to remind everyone that Chase Reiner is still holding tutorial sessions every Tuesday from 6 to 8 p.m. Via Zoom. The link is in your class program for Wednesday. And also posted in Blackboard. She said that people have not been showing up lately, which of course is fine, but I want to just remind you that that's happening, and especially as we move towards your final lecture exam and your final lab practical, that those sessions I think will be most helpful for you. So please do keep that in mind this week and the next couple of weeks. Also, I meant to take this off. I do not have open hours today. Sorry, I meant to actually put canceled for today. I am working from home today, as you know. Do want to remind you, though, that quiz number 5 will be Wednesday this week. It will cover the brain. We'll do that in class, and it will be closed book. So in a format similar to other in-class closed book quizzes. And it will focus only on material with the brain. Otherwise, for 8 class points, so longer reflection today, I'm going to ask you to upload the image of your KWLQ chart and answer a few other reflection questions about what we covered today. And I'm going to, with apologies, let me fix that. Put that back up for you, and I will put the link to that in the chat here too, so you can follow that link. Otherwise, I'm going to stop my recording here, but I will stay online and happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. Remember, you have a lab tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing you then. Tomorrow's lab is the heart, which is a fun one. I like this one a lot, actually. All right. Thank you, everybody.